Beyond Sprays, Managing Vegetable Garden Pests is a collaboration of 3 master gardeners. This webinar addresses common garden pest challenges in Western Oregon. The emphasis is on non-spray forward decision-making for home gardeners. The goal is fewer reoccurring problems over time, not total pest elimination. Read over these objectives. This webinar will help you, the home gardener, to evaluate, learn, and hopefully take action to prevent crop failures. Managing a productive garden is very rewarding, especially when you incorporate practices that embrace the entire garden and surrounding lands as an ecosystem with some kindness. So why go beyond sprays? What has history taught us? DDT was the new miracle insecticide, and when DDT became available for civilian use in 1945, there were few people who expressed second thoughts about this new miracle compound. But in less than 20 years, the negative effects were being felt by wildlife. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, published in 1962, exposed the hazards of DDT and set a stage for the environmental movement. Rachel Carson, a marine biologist and writer, uncovered the devastating disruption in the natural world. Look at those headlines. Look what she was up against. Pesticide industry up in arms over new book. Producers cry foul. Rachel Carson would not be silenced, and in 1963, she went on to testify before Senate subcommittees, citing evidence and negative ecological connections with pesticides. Her work set the stage for new regulations regarding pesticides. Food chains. Think of it as nature's ultimate buffet. So I'm wondering, at the first sign of a pest in your garden, what will you do? Our hope today is that you'll acquire a tool belt of strategies for your vegetable garden without sprays. At the first sign of a problem, you will stop and be scientific about pests and compassionate about our home we call Earth. And there are aisles filled with the next best bug spray and a quick fix for your pest problem, right? Well, don't be fooled by an industry that tries to convince you that an organic pesticide is going to cycle through the environment free of harm. Organic only means that it is plant-based. Insecticides harm pollinators directly or indirectly, as shown in this diagram from OSU. The bottom line is food chains are vulnerable. Look beyond sprays for pest control. Now, Cheryl will start to equip your tool belt. Cheryl, would you please share your screen?
You've given us some things to think about, Priscilla, and you're so right about putting sprays, particularly on vegetables. We want to present safe fruits and vegetables to our family and friends. So, how in the world can I safely control pests in my vegetable garden? Let's find out some ways. First, let's define clearly what constitutes a pest in a vegetable garden. An organism that can damage the plants you're trying to grow or impact human or animal health. This pest may transmit disease, or it might just be a nuisance. So a pest can be a plant, such as a weed, a vertebrate, such as a rodent, bird, or other mammal, an invertebrate, an insect, tick, mite, or snail, a nematode or pathogen, a bacteria, a virus, or fungus that causes disease. Now, it's really important to use a scientific approach when determining what to do about your pest problems long term. Employ these steps when considering how to solve a pest problem. Monitor your garden often. Identify the pest. Set a threshold. Use a combination of strategies and evaluate the results. Let's look at each of these a little more closely. Monitor your garden. Now that means frequently tour your vegetable garden and always be on the alert for any changes in plants, fruit, or general surroundings. Sometimes when a plant is a little bit stressed, Pests will write in to take advantage of that vulnerable plant. Is it in the right place? Getting enough water? Getting too much water? You need to be a detective in your own vegetable garden. Have any changes occurred in the vicinity of any damage you're noticing? If you happen to note any insects in the area, then collecting samples is important. I want to
Great.
remind you that not all pests will be insects, but in the event that insects are the problem, you can use sticky traps, such as the ones here on the far left. Just remember, don't avoid using sticky traps for long periods in the garden, as they will inevitably catch a beneficial insect. You do not wish to lose those. You can use a pitfall trap. Very easy for them to just go into, and then you can figure out what's causing the problem. There's also pheromone traps, which I will talk about more later. They can be employed to make your task easier. If the insect or pest is large enough for you to handpick, place them into a container for identification, such as this plastic bag here. Noting the specific damage and the extent of the impact on plants will be helpful information when determining what is causing plant damage. Also helpful to take a photo of the damage, not only up close, but from a distance, particularly if you plan to take the photos to the extension office for master gardeners to look at, or for you to take into the house to search on your computer. I also always collect any damaged leaves or other damaged plant parts and put them in a plastic bag. You need to ask yourself when you observe damage as to whether or not it's pest caused or environmental damage. Is the damage on the top or the bottom of the leaves? Or is damage only on the stem? Do you think it's plant stress, or was there some activity near the plant that caused it to be stressed? Maybe the damage is only on the fruit. Examples include too much water, too much sun or shade, herbicide or pesticide application that drifted onto the plant, or disruption in the root zone. I've included the Portland metro area hotline email here for your convenience if you want to seek master gardeners for some help. But if you're like me, you'll be tempted to run to your computer and try to find out what the problem could be with your plant. I mean, after all, you have the samples and the pictures right there to compare to images on your computer. I just would like to urge you to be mindful of how you conduct your research. I've listed here some really helpful links and resources that will be good, solid, science-based resources. The OSU Solve Pest Problem site can give you some helpful tips. Also, you can refer to the Pacific Northwest Insect and Disease Management Handbooks online. Always read them carefully and make sure that the damage you observe is the same as referred to in the manual. And always remember, if you place a query into your search engine, make sure you include a colon and an edu at the end to make sure you get a research-based result. Even then, you might be unsure of how to diagnose your problem, so remember, master gardeners are available to help. Now, it is critically important that you accurately identify the pest causing damage to your garden. I have to tell you that only 5% of identified insect species are pests. Chances are that if you're seeing an insect on a damaged plant, it could just be providing some beneficial service, like pollination or predation of a plant feeding insect. You need to ID the pest, understand its life cycle, and then research the best timing for action. Sometimes simply interrupting the life cycle of an insect or plant disease will eliminate it from your garden. You can collect your insect or insects in a container, including plant samples that demonstrate damage, and take them to the extension office. But if you are able to correctly determine the insect ID yourself or the plant pathogen, then you can plan a management strategy. Now, your management strategy will vary depending on the problem. But before we get to strategies, let's talk about tolerance. The extent of your management strategy is going to depend on your tolerance to damage on plants. Setting a threshold for how much damage is tolerable was your next step. I mean, are you noticing too many voles like this in your garden, in your vegetable garden? They like to eat the roots of plants. Do the deer eat too many of your plants? Are caterpillars defoliating your plants? Are slugs gobbling up your cabbage? Now, a few holes in leaves may be acceptable to you, but if the leaf is completely skeletonized, then action may be required. However, if the damage is not bothersome to you and not damaging the fruit, Sometimes letting the problem play out for the season is a viable strategy. Can I tolerate this damage? This is a cucumber beetle skeletonizing a leaf and eating a squash flower. Is this something I can tolerate? No. This pest will eat the flower, the leaves, and the fruit of the cucumber or the squash. I will need to take action. This may be a common sight for you. Slugs on cabbage and other leafy green vegetables. But what caused this damage? You know what? It's the same slugs as in the previous slide. They will use their raspy tongues to shred young sprouts. And did you know that they will damage the apical meristems of potatoes and destroy those growing points? That will effectively stop the potatoes from normal growth. Wise gardeners solve pest problems using one or more of the following strategies: cultural methods, the right plant in the right place; physical mechanical methods, how to keep pests away from plants; and biological methods. Let nature be your guide. Let's look at each of them. Cultural control techniques are practices that emphasize modifying the natural environment to reduce the potential for a pest problem. It simply means putting your plants in the right spot in the garden to best meet all of its needs. Examples include optimizing plant health by giving them proper water and fertilizer and carefully choosing plant varieties that will thrive in your garden and in your garden space. Try to select disease-resistant plants and seeds. There are nurseries and suppliers who use minimal amounts of herbicides and pesticides. They use organic methods. Avoid plants that are treated with neonicotinoids. They are harmful to beneficial insects and pollinators. If you're not sure the practices of a nursery you're visiting, ask the staff. If you do not, they don't have signs. Lots of times they'll have signs that say no neonicotinoids used here. Always select plants that are sturdy and have well-developed root systems. Don't be shy. You can pop those plants right out of their pot to see if the root system is well developed. Employ simple strategies to prevent problems in your garden bed before they even start. For example, as a vegetable gardener, avoid growing the same family of vegetables in the same place year after year. Planting the same crop in the same location successive years tends to increase pest problems. Why? Because vegetables in the same family will attract the same pests and pathogens. Some insects hibernate in the soil or in the litter around the plants, or lay eggs in or on the host plant. So they are perfectly thrilled that you have provided them with their favorite veggie each year. So be wise. Rotate crop families to prevent pest and pathogen problems. If you keep a garden journal, that will help you remember what you plant and where from growing season to growing season. I've attached here an article that discusses plant families and plant rotation methods. Also, monitor your garden for signs of too much water or too little, and make sure you provide that water into the root zone to conserve water and discourage foliar diseases on your vegetables. Always control weeds to eliminate competition for resources. And if you note any lack of blossoming or yellowing of leaves, it may indicate that the plant may need fertilizer to boost vigor in the plant. Now let's move on to some physical mechanical control methods. If you have a pest problem that cultural strategies have just not done anything for, then let's move on to physical mechanical management. That simply means erecting barriers to keep pests from gaining access to your plants. Creating barriers such as floating row covers, shown right here. It can help exclude pest populations by preventing them access. Netting fruits to prevent birds from eating all that fruit that you tried so hard to grow. Use plant collars around young seedlings to prevent cutworms from reaching your tender plants. Net cages over young sprouts will prevent rabbits and birds from damaging them. Unfortunately, the most effective way to prevent deer from feeding on your plants is to install an 8-foot high fence around the perimeter. But you can use something like sticky traps to lower the numbers of insects on your veggies. And if you've identified your insect accurately, a pheromone trap can be of great help. It is necessary to match the trap to the job. Insects that are controlled with pheromone traps, like the codling moth, the apple codling moth, and other moths that are referred to as pantry moths, pheromone traps are very great for. They work by luring the male of the species into the stick and hidden surface here. And the females do not mate with the males, therefore, none of the eggs they lay are fertilized. Now, these traps are effective, but control does not happen overnight. Females and larvae may persist for some time. That's a common pattern when you're using these strategies. Success sometimes means that you need to be patient to allow less toxic methods run their course. And if you see a problem, take action. Hand-picking insects or larvae from plants is quite effective in reducing pest numbers. Just drop them into a small container of soapy water. Grandchildren love to help do this task. Of course, you're going to prune diseased limbs or portions of a plant to arrest damage to the remainder of the plant. Be sure to remove all diseased limbs and leaves from the area to prevent spreading spores. Clean your tools and make sure that you put your removed materials into the garbage and not the compost pile. You can also employ these frightening devices in your garden to scare away other types of pests. This is one that blows up with air. Orchardists use this frequently, and this is a regular scarecrow. You just need to know these animals are pretty clever, and you will need to move these devices from time to time to keep them effective. Now, biological methods. This is another strategy for controlling pests in your garden, and very viable one, I must say. The very most effective and long-term method of biological control is to encourage beneficial insects into your garden. Beneficial insects will prey on unwanted pests in the garden, feeding on many soft-body insects that you don't desire there. If you plant a diversity of flowers, both native and hybrid, you will attract beneficial insects. There's also biopesticides. This is currently the fastest growing segment of pesticide development and designed to kill insects. Now, these materials are derived from natural sources like bacteria, plant compounds, and fungus. They're formulated to kill, and an example of some of the products that you might know are neem, citrus oil, eucalyptus oil, as well as common Bt products that are derived from the bacteria Bacillus thuringiensis. That is very common. Pictured here is a caterpillar that is killed by Bt. This is a normal caterpillar shown below. If you apply Bt to your vegetables, the caterpillar will ingest the product and kill it. It gets in their gut and kills it. Now, there are different formulations and strains of Bt for different target pests, so it's important to identify your pest correctly and to remember that applying something like Bt means that you will reapply every 7 days after you see the first larva. If you fail to interrupt the life cycle of that insect, it will increase its chances of getting resistance to the product, and it will no longer be effective. It is true, sometimes a beneficial caterpillar will be killed by Bt, even though that's not your intent. So be as responsible as you can and follow all the directions for application on the product. Now let's apply some of those strategies I just mentioned on the ever-present slug or snail. Now, a combination of strategies is the most effective at reducing slug and snail populations and minimizing damage to your vegetables. Here are some cultural methods for management of slugs and snails. Choose slug and snail resistant plants, those that are just too chewy for them. Remove damp and dark places from your vegetable garden. Avoid watering in the evening. Don't make them too happy by finding a moist place to be out in the evening. Make sure you turn over any winter mulch you've put around your vegetable. It makes a good hiding place. And of course, hand pick. It's a good way to decrease their numbers. Early in the spring, you can employ some trapping methods. These will be physical mechanical methods. Now, beer fall traps are great. Use cheap beer, for heaven's sake. Don't use expensive beer. They're as effective as a flashlight in hand picking. You can use copper strips that are at least 2 inches wide enough so that they will get that little electric shock they need to get. If they're too narrow, they'll hop over the copper strip. So get some that are wide. Most copper strips sold in garden stores are too narrow to work effectively. And of course, if you place a board over 2 rocks, at night they will collect underneath that and on the bottom of the board, underneath that by the rocks and underneath the board. And in the morning, you can drop them into soapy water before you have your morning coffee. And here's another idea for a physical trapping method. This is bread dough. Rory McDonald and his team at OSU gave slugs and snails a choice of a wide variety of foods, including beer, and they consistently went to the bread dough. They are attracted to the smell of yeast. It's not only inexpensive and easy to do, it also appears that it's viable for up to 8 days, which is a huge advantage. All you do is mix flour, water, and a teaspoon of dry yeast together, let it get bubbly, and take it outside and put it in slug traps. You can just put them in regular cups. That's usually what I do. If you make it soupy, they'll drown. If you make it thick, you can pick them off. Inexpensive and safe for the environment. Another really important step in minimizing slug and snail problems is that during the fall, be extra vigilant using hand picking and trapping to reduce the numbers of snails and slugs that will be out there to lay eggs and hatch out in the spring. Evaluate your results. Whatever strategy you try, it's important to reflect and evaluate the strategies and note the successes and failures. Biological systems behave in unexpected ways. Always check the effectiveness of a strategy, no matter which one was chosen, and make changes if needed. Now, I've given you several approaches to controlling pests in the garden without using sprays. And now Kara's going to discuss some specific pests in your vegetable garden and how you can eliminate them without the use of spray.
So let's see how we can apply some of those to common insect pests you may find in your garden. Recognizing pests and acting early is key. Go out into your garden every morning, every other day, inspect your garden and your plants to see what's going on. Not only is it a great way to look for pests, but you can watch as your garden evolves, and it's a lovely way to start your day. Learn to identify common pests at various life stages so you can see them early, recognize early stages of damage, learn to interrupt the life cycle, as Cheryl talked about, create physical barriers, remove the critters, and in the extreme case where you can't get a population under control, remove the plant. Here's one that I am sure you have all seen in your garden. These are aphids. There are over 4,000 species of aphids in the United States and about 100 in the Pacific Northwest. They're soft-bodied insects, kind of pear-shaped, and even though there's 100 different species and they can be green, black, red, yellow, or white, they all are very similar in look, behavior, and damage, so easy to generalize how we can think about them and manage them in our gardens. They have a pair of cornicles generally on their abdomen, as you can see in this lower left-hand diagram, and they cluster on new plant growth, as you see on the right. Aphids prefer tender young leaves and stems, so that's where you're going to see them gather. It's also where you're going to observe damage. You may see curled, stunted, or yellowing leaves or stunted plant growth. You can see a misshapen fruit. They produce a sticky residue, which is called honeydew. So this is what they exude because they're sucking the sap from the plants. And that honeydew, you may see it turn black with a sooty mold. And you may even see ants that are tending these aphids because they love the sugary honeydew and they herd the ants to collect food. Importantly, for all of these insects we're going to look at their life cycle because understanding where they are and what time of year they're active, that's going to help you figure out how you can interrupt their life cycles and keep their populations under control. In the spring, winged adults emerge from eggs and they land on their targeted plant. This is the really interesting thing about aphids and why they are so prolific. Wingless females then reproduce without fertilization. That's called parthenogenesis. They do that throughout the year, spring through summer, and they produce live young. So essentially, they're born pregnant. In late summer, both males and females will be produced. The females lay eggs. The eggs overwinter in the litter and bark. So a great time to figure out when to interrupt their life cycle is in the early spring when their populations are rising. You'll see them collected on the new plant growth. You'll also see them feeding on the underside of leaves. If you have more aphids than you can tolerate, wash them off with a stream of water. If you recall at this stage, they don't have wings, so when you wash them onto the soil, they're not likely to climb back up to the plant and they can't fly. Another tip is in the spring, we have a tendency to maybe add more nitrogen fertilizer than is necessary, and it's always a good idea to think whether your plants actually need fertilizer. If you use more nitrogen than the plant actually needs, what it does is spurs that young tender growth, and that excessive new growth is exactly what aphids like to feed on. Brassicas are a favorite of many pests, including aphids, and one trick to reduce your damage on brassicas is to plant and harvest them early before the huge rise in populations of aphids, which we see on the underside of this brassica leaf, or plant for fall harvest as the populations start to fall as the temperatures and the the new growth starts falling off, so your aphid populations decline. Here's an interesting thing about aphids. This is a fava bean that's planted, on the left one is planted about 2 feet away from the one in the middle. As you can see, there is a population of black aphids that are all over this fava bean. Right next to it, there aren't any aphids. So probably what happened is a female flew to that fava bean, reproduced, they kept reproducing, and it didn't land on this plant. Or what could have happened, here is a lady beetle that is on that same fava bean, and that lady beetle is saying, yum, yum, it's supper time when they see big populations of aphids. The good news about aphids is they're so prolific that they have a lot of predators and parasitoid insects that feed on them. Priscilla's going to talk more about this, but you can encourage predators and parasitoid insects in your garden by planting a diversity of plants. Here's some examples of those type of insects that feed on aphids. Lacewing beetles, lacewings, syrphid flies, lady beetles, and there are two types of parasitic wasps who lay eggs in adult aphids, which feed on the aphid bodies themselves. Here are the two examples of types of wasps that feed on aphids in the Pacific Northwest. You can see that the eggs were laid inside the aphid body. The larvae of the wasp emerged and the aphids were killed. Another insect that you may see in the spring that emerges very early are really the lovely cabbage white butterfly. They have about an inch wingspan. They're white. They have black tipped wings. The females have 2 black spots on each forewing. Males have 1. The underside of the wings, which you'll see when they fold them up, are creamy and yellow tinged. And the way to tell butterflies from moths is they have this club on their antenna. They fly from early spring to late fall. And this is a lovely butterfly, but they are an invasive species that we believe was introduced into the US from Canada in the late 1800s. They probably came in to Canada on cabbage, and they are now considered a pest across the US because they're very prolific, and because they're introduced, they have limited number of pests that feed on them. You can recognize the cabbage white butterflies because of the velvety green caterpillars that will appear on the underside of leaves. They have a faint yellow stripe down their back. They're hairy. They can leave greenish brown frass on vegetables, which you'll notice. The caterpillars grow to about 1.5 inches long. So here what you can see is a brassica with holes, and the caterpillars here are very tiny. So what you might observe first are the holes in the leaves, then start inspecting for these caterpillars. The cabbage white lay a single leaf on the egg on the back of the leaf, which you'll see here on the right. The later stage is the pupa stage, which is shown here on the left. So those are other life stages that you might recognize. The damage caused by cabbage white is by their larvae. And they chew round holes in leaves, usually on the outside leaves first is where you're going to see it. They tunnel into cabbage, cauliflower, and heads of broccoli and can make those crops inedible. They're this lovely green that tends to blend into brassicas in particular, so they're really camouflaged. So looking closely is a tip. The adults, though, are pollinators eating nectar and pollen, so you will see them flying around the garden, landing on any type of flower that's available. Here shows the damage that can happen on cabbage, which is why you want to catch them early so that you can avoid this type of damage. When we look at the cabbage white life cycle, the first thing that emerges are the butterflies in spring, and then they lay eggs on the backside of the leaves very early in the season, and then the caterpillars start emerging. The two times of year that you can find these and interrupt their life cycle successfully are early spring before their populations can get established. And then they will be back for a later life cycle later in the year if you haven't caught them all. So being vigilant across the span of your growing season is key. They can have 3 to 5 generations per year, so it's always wise to keep up your inspection. We'll talk more about hoop houses, but as Cheryl mentioned, creating barriers to pests is a great way to avoid damage in your garden. Particularly brassicas, it is an excellent idea to cover them with hoop houses that are covered with row cover and exclude the adults from the plants. Another tip is to inspect the leaves regularly, remove the eggs if you see them, pick the larvae and remove pupae. If badly infested, remove the plants. And if you have a bad infestation, clean up the litter from those host plants after the harvest and dispose of it somewhere other than your compost pile. This is one that if you've had it in your garden, you're probably going, oh my, it's a squash bug. This again is an insect that may be unfamiliar to you. However, its populations in the Pacific Northwest are increasing. OSU extension observations are that as summer temperatures have risen, the populations of squash bugs are moving north from California, and almost annually now you will see squash bug infestations in the Pacific Northwest further north. The adult is grayish brown, somewhat flattened. The adults are about at 0.6, a little over half an inch long. They have a row of alternating brown and gold spots on the margin of their abdomen, as you'll see in this photo. A key giveaway are these eggs. They're reddish brown. They're laid in sets on the underside of leaves, and that may be the first thing you observe. Unfortunately, those adults survive for 3 or 4 months, so if they're in your garden, you need to be vigilant throughout the growing season. Squash bugs are a true bug, so they have nymphs that have 5 instar stages. So the nymphs continue to shed their exoskeletons as they grow. They look similar at every stage. They appear light green, blue, or gray with black legs, and they are fast and they hide in the soil. Squash bugs not only damage plants, but they can also be a vector of yellow vine disease. Their host plants are cucurbits, squash, cucumbers, pumpkins, and melons. They do tend to prefer winter squash plants. And how they damage the plants is they suck sap from the leaves and fruit and damage the xylem, so that collapses the food system in the plant. The plants can wilt and die if the infestation is heavy. And as I mentioned, they're also a vector of the yellow vine disease, which is a bacteria. And that disease can cause total collapse of the plant in sometimes a day. If you haven't seen many bugs, but you've seen a few and you see total collapse of your vine, that may well be the result of the bacteria rather than the squash bug damage. Understanding the squash bug life cycle is key. They're so very recognizable, particularly their eggs and their nymphs. In May, the adults emerge under rocks and logs where they've overwintered. They're going to lay 10 to 14 eggs on the back of leaves typically. In June or July, the nymphs start feeding on the leaves. July and August, the nymphs mature into more adults. So as you can see, these populations can quickly build up. The way to control squash bugs, which unfortunately we've had a lot of experience with in a demonstration garden in Multnomah County, is to remove the bugs, remove the eggs. Inspect the underside of squash leaves regularly. And if you've seen this on your plant, you're going to go, eek, I better get busy. Those eggs are really tough, so you can't just drop them in soapy water. You need to mash them against a hard surface or drop them in a jar of 97% alcohol. That will kill them. It doesn't have to be a lot of alcohol, but make sure they're submerged. The adults and nymphs hide in the soil. One trick is to put boards down next to the plant that are infected, and in the morning, pull the boards up when it's still cold, and you can catch them then because they're going to be clinging to that board. You can brush them into a pail of soapy water. Another trick in the morning is to spray water at the base of the plants that will chase the adults and juveniles up on the stem of the plants where you can catch them. Pick off the adults and nymphs, put them in a bucket of soapy water. Again, water won't kill the eggs, but it will drown the individual adults and nymphs. And if you have a severe persistent outbreak, rotate squash out of your garden. We are doing that in the Multnomah County demonstration garden because we have had an outbreak 3 years in a row. It's a good idea to just exclude that pest by removing the plants. The western spotted cucumber beetle, which Cheryl talked about, is an adults are about a 1/4 inch long, so they're kind of small beetles. They're yellow-green bodies with 12 black spots, really easy to recognize. They have a black head with long antennae with visible segments. They're active spring through fall. They're very active in mid-August. And not only do the cucumber beetles cause damage on vegetables, but so do their larvae. They live in the soil, they feed on roots and underground stems, and they can also chew on vegetables or melons that are resting on the soil, fruits that's resting on the soil. The damage on host plants, the host plants include snap beans, cucurbits, again, cucumber, melons, squash, and pumpkins. The larvae eat the plant roots. The adults cause damage on the leaves, and they also eat flowers. It can just be aesthetic damage, but if you have a big outbreak, they can cause so much damage to a plant, it cannot thrive. And they also carry a bacterial wilt that kills plants. This is a bacterial wilt that overwinters in the bodies of the beetles. So when they emerge in the spring, they can have this bacterial wilt in their system. And when they feed on the plants, it's injected into the plant. The optimum temperature for this bacteria is 52 to 60. So it's in the early spring. You may see results of this. Again, the leaves will wilt suddenly. The bacteria spreads to the petioles and stems. So if you see this, pull that plant up because that you need to get rid of the beetles or that will spread to your other plants. There are 2 generations per season. They overwinter as adults. The adults lay eggs somewhere near your host plants, not necessarily on them. They pupate in the soil in about 2 months, and then the adults become active at about 50 degrees. You're going to first find those adults. That's what you're going to see, and you're going to see them on the stems, leaves, and flowers. Another reason to install row covers is to exclude the cucumber beetle. If you see them, knock the adults off from stems, leaves, and flowers into a bucket of soapy water, and then you interrupt their life cycle. If you see a wilt, if you've got a bad infection, pull up the plants and the soil around the plants to remove all stages of the beetles, put in a plastic bag and put it in the garbage so you are removing that threat from your garden. The other good news about our friends, the predators, is they like to eat cucumber beetle and larvae. So beetles are a great biocontrol, as are spiders, which we all should be excited about when we see them in our garden. Here's another really pesky, tiny little fly. The adults are gray or black. They're about a quarter to a half inch long. These are called leaf miners. There's two species that are pests, common pests in the Pacific Northwest. Their larvae are translucent, white or yellow. You'll see them on that bottom corner image. The adults lay eggs on the underside of leaves. Where you're going to see the damage and why these are a pest is the larvae tunnel through the leaves and they kill the plant tissue, making large irregular blotch mines, as you'll see here on this spinach leaf. And if they're in your spinach, in your chard, or your beet greens, they really are inedible. Leaf miners emerge from the soil and turn into these flies, which fly onto the host plants. They lay their eggs. The eggs hatch pretty quickly, and then the larvae mine for 7 to 12 days. That is where you're going to see evidence of this pest. The other stages are so small, likely you're not going to notice them. There's a couple of ways to avoid the damage. Of course, you can always rotate crops to a different area of the garden if you're seeing outbreaks. However, warning was something that flies. If they're in your garden, they can fly over to where those crops may be relocated. Covering your host plants early in the season can exclude those adults. But here is a trick that really helps reduce the damage throughout the growing season. When you see that damage on your plant, cut off the leaves because you're eliminating the larvae from the system. And you can cut off most of the leaves of a spinach or a chard plant, and they will just keep growing. So remove those damaged leaves to try to get the populations under control. The next one we're going to look at is a flea beetle. They're very tiny beetles, about a quarter-inch long. They have strong hind legs and they jump like fleas. There's 3 species that are pests in the Pacific Northwest: a crucifer beetle, which feeds on brassicas; tuber beetles feeds on potatoes; the western potato flea beetle feeds on nightshade plants like tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers. The crucifer beetles shown here are shiny blue-black. Tuber and western potato flea beetles are more of a dark bronze color. The damage you're going to notice, this is what you're going to see to say, I've got flea beetles in my garden, or they make shot hole in leaves, typically in the bottom leaves of a plant because they're leaping from the soil. Host plants include lettuces, chard, beets, spinach, tomatoes, eggplants, and brassicas. Again, our friend brassicas, poor things, everything likes to eat them. Mature plants can withstand the damage from flea beetles. However, young plants can be consumed because not only are the flea beetles themselves feeding on leaves, but the larvae are feeding below ground and they can severely damage or kill seedlings and transplants. Larvae damage shown here on potatoes can also make your potato crops inedible. Here's a flea beetle life cycle. They have 1 to 3 generations per year. So again, they're going to be there unless you catch them early. They overwinter as adults. They emerge in April or May. They start feeding, lay their eggs near the soil. The larvae feed early on the roots and foliage. They pupate in the soil, and then the adults emerge in June, which is may be when you first see that damage. Flea beetle control. Check your plants twice a week until your seedlings have 4 to 5 true leaves. They may then have emerged from to be large enough to avoid being harmed by flea beetles. Install row covers early to exclude them. Another trick is planting trap crops. So these flea beetles love arugula. You may love it too, but they love it better. They like radish and mustard. Plant them around crops that you are trying to protect, and they will go to those crops. They will become a magnet. Then remove those plants and bag them, throw them away, and you will have removed a lot of the population of flea beetles. Beneficial nematoids of this particular family genus will also help eat the larvae of the flea beetles. Predators also feed on adults. Lacewing larvae, damsel bugs, parasitic wasps are also a control agent for flea beetles. Now our last one. This is the brown marmorated stink bug, and I featured this one because it is really increasingly of a concern. It is an invasive stink bug that has been imported into our area, and it is becoming a pest actually at a global scale. The reason it's such a pest is it's highly invasive and feeds on over 170 different crops, including fruits, vegetables, and even ornamentals. And when these populations can become really large and they invade homes in large numbers because they're overwintering where it's warmer. It's a true bug that has 5 instar stages. So this is the eggs and how they emerge as a tiny first instar, and then they continue to grow and shed their skins. You want to understand which stink bug you're looking at because we do have bugs that look very similar to this that are native to our environment. We do, if we observe this particular bug, want to remove it from the environment because we are trying to get their populations under control. You can recognize them because they have a banded antenna. They are mottled in color. If you look at them very close, they have indentations in their scarpae around their collar. The reason they don't have a lot of pests here is they have a strong defensive odor when they're disturbed. This is really odd, but they always lay their eggs in masses of 28, and they form a black triangle before they hatch, which seems a little bit alien. They have 5 instar stages, as I mentioned, and the stage where you're first going to find them or where you'll observe them and be able to recognize them is this egg and first instar stage. Physical removal and destruction by hand-picking adults and nymphs and eggs from plants is the best way to control them. So while you're looking for other pests, if you see these, get rid of the eggs, put them in alcohol, destroy them. Using row covers also helps protect vegetables from feeding and damage. There is also an imported Asian samurai wasp, which has been brought into our area because it is an enemy of the marmorated stink bugs, and research is showing that it can kill a high percentage of their eggs. So we mentioned this a couple times that making hoop houses is one of the best ways that you can exclude every one of these insects from your host plants. So if you know the pest, you know what plants they're going to target, cover them up in the spring with greenhouse-like structures we're calling hoop houses. You can build them inside a raised bed. You can build them on the ground over a bed. Cover the hoops with row cloth. And when you cover them with row cloth early in the year, you can also help warm the soil. The materials you can use are metal hoops, which if you want to create a very large hoop house, Those metal hoops are better, but they do require bending. If you have a lower hoop house, you can use PEX pipe, which is used in water construction, or even irrigation tubing. You put stakes in the ground, which you could use rebar, bamboo stakes, or metal tubes. You put row cover cloth over them. Row cover cloth is a breathable, non-woven spun polyester. It's reusable. You can wash it. And you secure it onto the tubing with binder clips. So all readily available materials. First, you pound stakes into the ground. You cut pipes to the desired width and height. Metal hoops require bending, as I mentioned, but PEX piping or irrigation tubing are really flexible and easy to use. You place the tubing over the fittings, cut and place the row cover over the hoops, making sure you have enough fabric to tuck under, hold that fabric in place with rocks or bricks so there's no way the pest can get in. And you hold the row cover onto the piping with binder clips. So just some tips on how we can control pests in our garden. And now we're going to toss it back to Priscilla to give us some other tips about how to exclude pests from our gardens.
Wow, that's a lot of great information. And hopefully, when you see the replay of this, you'll get all those details. Outstanding. Well, here is some good news. There's some beneficial plants, and they're very important to have near a vegetable garden. They are the secret weapon in the attraction, growth, and development of beneficial insects. They can be part of a biological pest control program. Pest control using chemicals can exclude insect species from the garden. Some amazing research by the Garden Ecology Lab has led to these discoveries that plants offer free pest control services. Here we have the Douglas aster. Come on, there we go. And we have the pearly everlasting, the Canada goldenrod, farewell to spring. They attract predators and parasitoids. In addition, you can plant Oregon sunshine for predator attraction, and yarrow. Yarrow is known to attract the parasitoids. Let's move on and see what else we can do. Well, first of all, predators are carnivorous insects. They eat soft-bodied insects. The minute pirate bug in these photos is just one example. Predators are generalists. They'll eat what they see when they come along, like aphids, thrips, spider mites, leafhoppers, and caterpillars. Parasitoids are small but mighty, and experts consider them even more important than predators for controlling pests. Parasitoids eat their prey from the inside out. They lay eggs in, on, or near a host, and then the hatchlings eat the host. This photo shows a wasp drilling through bark to deposit eggs near or on the beetle grub. This wasp is part of the Ichneumonidae family, and it consists of thousands of species of parasitoid wasps, each species specializing on one host. Or should we say victim? Most parasitoids are wasps and sometimes a fly. They are small and they usually escape your casual observation, so look closely. The lethal stage of parasitoids is often the immature form, doing their job inside the prey. This photo shows a hornworm caterpillar covered with cocoons. This is super creepy looking. So, how did it happen? Well, the chain of events began when an adult braconid wasp laid eggs in the caterpillar. Hatchlings ate the caterpillar from the inside, and then they pupate in these white cocoons, turning the caterpillar into a nursery. If you see something like this, leave it or not. Believe me, in this stage, the caterpillar is not going to be hurting your plant. Just leave it be. Soon, a new generation of wasps will emerge to find new victims in your garden. So let's think through how you might plant a biodiverse garden to deal with an aphid outbreak. Aphids are food for many insects, including the adult or the juvenile stage. And they are very effective. They are natural enemies. The aphid midge is a small fly whose larvae prey on aphids. The lacewing, the larvae feed on aphids, and so do the adults. They're good to have in your garden. The damsel bug. Adults use their forelegs to snap up and catch and hold their prey. Biodiversity really pays dividends when it comes to keeping your garden ecology system in balance. Yeah, nature gets it right. Predators, pests, and plants. Here is how you might plant a biodiverse garden to deal with pests. Biodiversity in flowers you choose really pays off with its biological control of the pests. In a study, these flowers hosted the most parasitoids. Big winners were Pearly Everlasting, Farewell to Summer, Canada Goldenrod, and the Douglas Aster. They were all in the top 5 with attracting a diversity of parasitoids and predators. Rounding out that top 5 is the yarrow, where it hosted a high diversity of parasitic wasps. And Oregon sunshine hosted the high diversity of predators. So by planting a nice diverse amount of flowers, you are going to attract numerous insects, beneficial insects. So how can you imitate nature? Well, here's a partial list of additional plants that attract predators and parasitoids. The more diversity of plants, the healthier your garden. All of these will be pretty easy to grow, self-sow, or spread. Manage the plants for the balance you're looking for in your garden. And here's a little more to consider. Research has demonstrated that some elements of a native habitat attract beneficial native insects. It especially provides them with places to overwinter, like this stack of yard debris. This element helps beneficials with housing, so they remain in your garden for the next growing season. Also remember to provide beneficial insects with some water sources. You can build a puddler, which is a shallow dish with soil and rocks that allow for insects to access the water easily. Like kids, insects love a muddy space to get water and other nutrients from that native soil. So you're wondering about the purchase of beneficials like a lady beetle or praying mantis. Well, it just is not the same as attracting our native predators and parasitoids. The ones you buy are usually not native to the Pacific Northwest and usually move from your garden even though you have resources, pests to feed them. So think about what you can do. Provide diversity of plants and habitat that will attract insects naturally into your landscape. And Carol spoke about crop trap crops. Here's a list of those companion plants that may help you with a pest problem. What's really important with trap crops is to use them properly. So you want to get your timing correct. You want that trap crop established before the pests arrive. And you want the placement at the edge or the perimeter of the veggie planting that you're trying to protect. And very important, once that is infested with those pests, toss it out in the garbage in a bag. And as Cheryl mentioned, you want to make very good observations, see how things are going, adjust your treatment in your garden, and then again, crop rotation. Don't plant in the same place over and over. Those pests are happy to arise and eat your crop. Okay, research reminds us that the best use of a companion plant in a vegetable garden draws pollinators to set your fruits and helps with pest control by enticing the good predator insects to feed on those pests. I plant a lot of herbs in my garden and I allow a few of them to bolt. When they go to flower, they attract the beneficials. And take a look at this photo, providing some islands of flowers or some native flowers in bunches or in the vicinity of raised beds offers enticements for your beneficial insects. This community garden is flanked by many of the native flowers that we have talked about. The native flowers help this community of gardeners stay ahead of pests. So now it's time to wrap up with all three of us. And Cheryl, would you go ahead and start?
Well, think of your garden this way. Here are the tools you need to manage your garden without sprays. Plant a diversity of plants, as Priscilla just said. Draw in those parasitoids and predators. Monitor your garden frequently. Catching a problem early will always be an advantage. Attract those beneficial insects. Set a damage threshold for yourself and always evaluate your results. And of course, I know you'll always continue to be vigilant.
So to recap barriers that we talked about, because we're focused on vegetable pests and focused on insects, using row cover cloth over your beds and constructing hoop houses is a great way to create barriers to these pests. Cheryl also shared with us some mechanical barriers for slugs by putting copper strips in your garden so they can't climb over them. Cultural really reminds us to think about not only putting the right plant in the right place, including planting a diversity of other types of plants next to your vegetables, but making sure that our plants have the right care so that we have put them in the right amount of sunlight, they have the right amount of water so they are healthy, and then we are vigilant. So thinking about biological controls, if we recognize the pests in our garden and we understand where they are at what time of year, we can look for them and we can interrupt their life cycle at the right stage and remove them from our gardens. And then, Priscilla, maybe you can remind us about how we attract beneficial insects.
Sure. The biological strategies, including bringing nature's secret weapon, is really important, beneficial insects. With a pesticide-free garden, you can attract and house many different predators and parasitoids that will feast on your pests in your garden. We also talked about providing habitat and resources that will help the insects thrive and maybe stick around from year to year. The use of companion plants like trap crops will draw pests away from the veggie crop that you want to eat, and companion planting of natives and herbs will attract and feed the beneficials you want in the garden. With a tool belt full of science-based tools and strategies, we hope that you, the home gardener, feels empowered to do your best for the garden and for our home we call Earth. And here is a long list of the resources that Carol, Cheryl, and I used. Again, you can access these when you get your recording in about 2 days. Check junk mail if it's not coming through. And if you have any additional questions, you can always send a message to us at 10 Minute University. And right now, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to toss it to our co-host to hear about some questions that have been coming in.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple questions because there are a couple. Okay, Carol, you mentioned that brassicas were quite a magnet for all kinds of pests that you named. Do you keep floating row cover over your brassicas all season? How do you handle that at the garden?
Great question. If we plant brassicas, we absolutely will install row cover cloth in a hoop house before we plant. So we're doing it before we even get started. A tip there is some of these like to fly in, so we also remove that cloth regularly and inspect for pests. I will say our experience in the Multnomah County demonstration garden is when we have planted brassicas, we've planted seed in July and starts in August. We have not covered them with row cover and we have not had outbreaks of any kind of pests. We do monitor them, of course, but the populations have not been established in the garden and we've seen less damage.
Good answer. Thank you. Priscilla, one question did come in. This person has raised beds and they have lots of plants or beneficial plants, that draw beneficial insects in around their garden. So, what would you recommend for planting a bed? Do they need to plant them in the raised beds, or what's the proximity to beneficial plants to your vegetables?
Yeah, the research shows that the beneficial plants should be within 2 rows. So we're wanting them in close proximity. They don't have to be actually in the bed. And so that's the short and easy answer.
I thought that was really nice when you talked about flower islands. You could do a beneficial flower island, near your vegetables, and that would be wonderful too,
Yes,
wouldn't it?
yeah. And at the experimental garden that I grow at with the other master gardeners, we have grown big pots of beneficial plants, like big bags, and we place those at the end of the rows, and that has been very helpful in our past.
Smart.
Mhm.
You just need to be patient to let that play out. I always think about Amy Campion, who gave a presentation for 10 Minute University last year at the end of the season, but she very patiently watches predatory insects feast on aphids one by one, and she takes a video of it. So patience wins. Don't use spray. Try to be patient and use these other strategies we've mentioned, and I think you're golden. And we've kind of run long, and
And
that
we
those
thank you
were
for staying.
Oh, so many people did hang in there with us. So I thought it was a lot of great information. And I hope everybody employs it.
All
Thank you
right.
all.
Okay. Bye, everybody. See you next
Bye,
week
everyone.
for a plant. I have plant problems that are caused by weather and what people do. That'll be a fun one to watch next Wednesday. See y'all then.